Okay, let's get to our roundtable now tonight and welcome back some familiar faces to MiWeek. Of course, our regular MiWeek contributor, Stephen Henderson from the Detroit Free Press is here. And next to him is Nancy Kaffer, also a columnist at the Free Press. It's always great to have you back here, Nancy.
It's lovely to be here.
Stephen, I hope you had a good week off. All right, let's go over to my right-hand side. Dave Dulio, professor and chair of the Political Science Department at Oakland University, and Steve Mitchell, CEO of Mitchell Research and Communications. You see his polls during election season. So it's good to see both of you again, and welcome back to MiWeek.
Thank you. Great to be here. Good to be here.
All right, so let's jump into it. And what I want to start with really is the historic nature of Hillary Clinton's nomination. And I want to start there first because I want to ask, do you feel that we were able to take in the historic moment enough? Or is the political climate in this country so tough that it was like, oh, yeah, but we still don't like Hillary Clinton? And I'm going to start with you, Nancy, on this.
There obviously is some of that. There are people who feel very strongly about Hillary, dislike her. But I see more and more people, women especially, talking about how much this means to them. She has we had a poll a few weeks ago saying historic levels of support for Hillary among women. This is huge. This is I mean, you can say that it's a symbolic victory for women. It's a literal victory for women. We've defined after, more than 200 years of American leadership, we've now defining this job as one that a woman can be qualified to have, and that's huge. It's something that many other nations have sort of reached this goal before us. It's sort of shameful that it's taken us this long, but I also think that there's a real for people who say, really shouldn't be Hillary. I don't like Hillary. I would like another woman. I would support another woman, but not Hillary. This is not an easy path to tread, and I would submit that it's maybe not possible to wind up here without the baggage that Hillary's acquired along the way.
What do you think about that, Dave? Let me pop over.
Well, I think Nancy's right. I think that this is just another way in which this election cycle is historic, right? It's one that we'll remember for forever, right, in American politics, that this is the first time this has happened. You never forget firsts. But I do think that it's been stepped on a bit. I think that her ascension here, or the capping off of her ascension, has been stepped on by the litany of troubles that the Democrats have had leading up until today, with the email leaks and the resignation of the party chair, et cetera, et cetera.
How much do you think of that has been a cloud on this week?
I think that's a cloud. I think the dissension in the ranks among Democrats over Bernie Sanders also sort of cast a little bit of a shadow over this really remarkable accomplishment. And I also think because this first comes after 2008, when you had an African American first at the top of a ticket, there's a little bit of, it's a second first, and so it's not quite the remarkable thing for a lot of people that it was then, because it had literally never happened before that these historically disadvantaged populations had reached that level. At the same time, there's no question that among women, this is Hillary Clinton's popularity is huge, as Nancy pointed out. I don't think that's gonna wane, and I think she has an opportunity tonight to, again, I thought Nolan's characterization of this as her opportunity to show something about herself that brings more people in. That is absolutely what is at stake for her.
Steve, what do you think that the tone has been like this entire week compared to what we saw last week happening in Cleveland with the Republicans?
Well, I think that the Democrats would argue that the Republican convention was doom and gloom, and whereas they're upbeat and positive. It's sort of a fine line that they have to draw, because you'll hear Hillary Clinton on the campaign saying that we've got to do more, we've got to have better jobs, we've got to do a better job, yet she can't sort of say that when the incumbent president is coming in, because they've been in power for the past 8 years. So the Democrats would argue that there's just been this change in tone and tenor, that they're more upbeat and they're more positive. I think, unfortunately, because of the email scandal and the resignation of the party chairman, Wasserman Schultz, you do have these problems. They got stepped upon yesterday by more WikiLeaks on the phone calls. And Trump was out doing press conferences that normally doesn't happen. But I think that's the argument they would make. At the end of the day, Melania, Trump, Ted Cruz were issues for the Republicans. Wasserman Schultz and some of the other issues are for the Democrats, but it'll come down to how effectively will Hillary Clinton try to close the deal tonight when she speaks to the voters, because that's what probably will be the most watched aspect of this. Trump got a serious bump out of the Republican convention, and we haven't had bumps lately. Will there be a correspondingly similar bump for Hillary Clinton after she tries to close the deal tonight? And that's the question we don't know.
Go ahead, Nancy.
What I find interesting about the tone of the two conventions is I think it tells you a lot about the group of voters each party has given up on reaching. You hear the Republicans saying things are terrible, things are awful, your life is so much worse now than it was 8 years ago.
You are in danger.
And the people that they're speaking to are generally manufacturing workers, folks who have lost their jobs, folks who haven't been able to re-enter the labor force, folks who feel hostile toward immigrants and want to associate their troubles with that. And then you hear Democrats saying, America's still great, America's, we've been doing well, and they're speaking to a lot of middle-class people whose lives aren't really more awful than they were 8 years ago. If you're gay, if you're a woman, if you're, there's a lot of key groups where we've had not just intangible improvements, but real tangible policy things that have happened at the court or in the legislatures that have made lives better. So, there are people who have real grievances on the Trump side, and there are people who have real things to be happy about on the Clinton or Democrat side, and who those messages are being positioned toward indicates who they think their voter pool are, and I think it's a bit of a bet as to which one.
And I think it's interesting too, because they're also, I saw a big push last night, especially in a lot of the speeches coming from you see Michael Bloomberg and also the president who quoted Reagan. They're also saying, hey, come on over, Republicans, if you are not so happy where you are right now, Dave.
Well, and that's a big battle for many Republicans, right? They have to convince some traditional Republicans to come to Trump. I think they accomplished a bit of that last week, but I think Steve hits on an interesting point where with the thin line that the Democrats have to walk between supporting President Obama and saying he's going to come out and say that he's going to pass the baton and it's going to be basically 4 more years, right? Well, I get your point, Nancy, but the historic numbers or approaching historic numbers of Americans who think the country's going in the wrong direction, that's a problem. Right there, so I think there are a lot of people who are, whether we agree with them or not, are scared and are worried. Right. So I think that's the advantage that Trump has at this moment.
I think it also goes back to then what Hillary Clinton has to prove tonight in saying, all right, we've heard all these things. Now this is what I'm going to do to help improve lives right now.
So that seems like an advantage for Trump now because people are frustrated and they are angry. But historically, you can't really point to a time in American history where Americans have chosen a president who is pushing a fearful message over somebody who is pushing a more hopeful message. And the challenge for Trump really is to stop the sort of dark nature of the things that he's saying and doing to appeal to that sense of hope, which Americans always want to go into the booth and pull the lever thinking this is pushing us forward, not looking back at something else.
So does it come down to messaging a little bit?
It comes down to messaging, but you talk about history. It is very difficult for the party in the White House to elect a non-incumbent.
Yes.
It's only happened twice in the last 100 years. Yeah. Herbert Hoover, Republican, succeeded Coolidge, and George H.W. Bush succeeded.
And Truman succeeded.
But without death, you got a death involved in that.
But he was reelected.
He was reelected, but you still have that problem, and I think that's a different situation. Mm-hmm. So historically, since World War II, we've gone 8 with 2 exceptions. Carter served 1 term, and Bush and Reagan served 3. So historically, it's tough. You've got a popular president who's favorable still at about 50%. His job approval is at 50%, but you have the perception that the economy in the country is not doing well. And every time there's a terrorist attack, that does not benefit the party that's in power because it makes them look a party to it. And so you have this huge gulf on sort of immigration, which is a major issue. And it's always been a major issue. No Republican had the courage to bring it up because they feared losing Hispanics. And you get to the labor people, in the poll we did right before the convention here in Michigan, at that point Clinton was up 6 statewide, but she was only getting 51% of the labor vote. 25% going for Trump, 25% undecided. She needs to get more of the labor vote.
Nancy.
So the Republicans' postmortem of the 2012 presidential election, their own postmortem suggested, that, it was said in plain terms, that they could not continue to win elections by building a coalition only of sort of angry, aging white people. They've sort of doubled down on tapping angry white people as their electorate that they're reaching out to. And I think this is going to be a big question. Can you win with that? And we're going to find out. These polls saying people believe the country is going down the tubes, that we're headed in the wrong direction, versus people who say, things are problematic. There's some problems. We're working on them. We're still great. It's sort of an existential question that voters are looking at here. What kind of country are we, and what kind are we going to be, and which group of voters is going to wield the most influence in terms of setting that
It's
course?
interesting. One of the things that I've noticed about both candidates, right, is that they really haven't, to me, given Americans a reason to vote for them. They have been giving Americans plenty of reasons not to vote for the other candidate, and I really didn't hear that hear the reason to vote for Trump aside from here and there. But it was, even in his speech last week, it was, don't vote for Clinton, right? Mm-hmm. I'll be very interested to hear tonight if Hillary Clinton makes that positive appeal. Yeah. That I think Americans are looking.
Do you think that would be effective?
Well, I think that's what she'll do. I mean, and again, this gets to my point about the difference between a fearful message and a hopeful one. You know, there are not a lot of opportunities for these candidates to have a national audience who is paying rapt attention to what they say. The convention is one, the debates are the others. Mm-hmm. Trump blew his last week, trashing the other candidate and making all kinds of racist and other bizarre statements. I don't think you'll see Clinton do that. I think she's enough of a pro.
And Trump's still got a pretty good bump. One of the biggest bumps in 16 years.
But you know what that bump? You know what that bump is about? I mean, if you look at those numbers, that 44-39 number. Think of the number of undecideds that are in there. What you're seeing is people not going to Clinton who are likely to do that. Anyway, you don't see, he didn't pick up new voters with that speech. I mean, there's no way people were looking at
Nancy.
that undecided and thinking, well, this is my guy.
And what was also really troubling to me about the way that Trump framed his speech is, after his speech, I read the acceptance speech of every nominee since 1980. And all of them, and I read Nixon's from '68. So all of them have talked about things are going in the wrong direction, and I'm the person who can fix this, and my opponent is a moron, is basically the general message that you send. Trump is the only nominee who has said, America is a corrupt, rigged, broken system. And that seems like opening a really troubling door. You can say my opponent is terrible, my opponent is corrupt, my opponent is awful, but to say that this institution that I am asking you to put me in charge of is rigged, corrupt, and broken.
I think it's
interesting.
interesting.
We have not had a nominee say that.
I think that it's interesting that we're spending a lot of our time when we're supposed to be talking about the Democrats and their week, that we're talking about Trump. But I think this is a very fascinating point because you find that people are gravitating towards this, and so it's almost just like, well, you can't vote for him, you just got to vote for anybody.
Well, but the thing is about Hillary Clinton, her strength is that she's a nerd, and she has tons and tons of policy papers on her website that you can read about how she has detailed plans to fix everything.
Some good Friday night reading.
But that's the thing, it's not exciting. Like actual good management and administration and sound policy and good governance, those things aren't exciting. But I think it's absolutely essential for Clinton campaign and people who support her to start making a positive case.
I think you'll see her spend some time tonight on that sort of stuff, but more importantly, she has got to connect with voters and communicate this sort of personal message that she wants to.
So leaving the Trump attacks to Tim Kaine, to everybody else who wants to come on board, Dave.
Well, that's usually the role of the vice presidential candidate, right? Is to play attack dog, and I think.
And he took it on. He took it on Wednesday night. With imitation, included imitations.
He sure did, and it was effective, right? I mean, that's the kind of thing that is effective for base voters, right? Because as you talked about with Nolan, right? The Democrats are still trying to make sure that they have this unity coming out of this convention, and that's been tough for them. I think the rigged system point. That plays to the Sanders crowd, right? They believe that too.
Sure.
And that just simply saying that is driving a wedge between a lot of Democrats, and I think that continues to be a problem for Hillary Clinton.
You know, in the short time that we have left, Steve, I want to talk a little bit about these undecideds that we're talking about, the people who haven't really made up their mind yet, because that's what we're all going to be looking at now in these next couple of months. Where do you see, and why do we see so many undecideds right now, do you think?
In our poll, we had 27% undecided, and that was July 5 through 7 and finished up on the 11th. I mean, that is a huge number of undecideds at this point. Clinton was leading by 20 points with women. Trump's leading by 10 with men. They're really all over the place. I mean, it's just consistent across. I think the reason you have so many undecided voters is, quite frankly, there's such strong dislike for both candidates. Both candidates have negatives in the 50s, and so therefore people are trying to figure out if they can like one or the other, or which is the lesser of two evils. And at some point they're going to do that. Generally incumbents, and Hillary Clinton has to be regarded as having even though she's not the incumbent, she's a former Secretary of State, she's a Democrat, part of the administration. They tend to vote against incumbents.
All right, we have 1 minute left, and I want to get all of your opinions on what Hillary Clinton needs to do now in these next, coming out of the convention.
Well, I mean, coming out of the convention, you've got to have this hopeful message, right? You've got to put people in the mind that they're going to go in the booth and vote for a hopeful future by voting for you, not a dark one. And if Donald Trump keeps down that road, he'll almost certainly lose.
Nancy?
You know, I think she's going to she's going to have to figure out a way to communicate her detailed and practical policy plans in a way that gets people excited about them, and that's tricky. But she's been preparing for this for a real long time, so I'm sure she's got a plan.
All right, we'll see it. Dave?
I think they're both right. I think she has to come out and give people a reason to vote for her rather than against Donald Trump. And I think she has to make herself more personable, make herself more relatable. That's going to be a tough thing to do. That voters have rejected that, so to speak, so far, or not really trusted her to do that. We'll see if she can turn the tide.
Steve, you get the last 10 seconds.
Likability. She has to improve her likability.
Okay, Steve Mitchell, Dave Giulio, Nancy Kaffer, of course, Stephen Henderson. Thanks so much, guys. I really appreciate it.